Hey, welcome in, everyone. Good Wednesday evening to you. Thanks for joining Dom Time. It's the evening where we have some of the best pundits across the Delaware Valley mix it up on a wide variety of issues. Some of them serious, like what we're watching on TV in Philadelphia, the departure of Charlie Manuel, and others more frivolous, like what's going on in Camden. No, just kidding. But joining us tonight, Kevin Reardon, who covers South Jersey for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and also back with us, Sean Walsh from the Philadelphia Daily News, to talk about some of the issues that are out there since the last time that we've talked. Kevin, I wanted to begin with you with Camden. I saw a big piece in the Inquirer, and that's your beat, a lot of the things you cover, where Camden now, with this new regional police department, and I guess maybe more, certainly more than they had before, is going to the broken windows syndrome, meaning the small stuff, noise, etc., not wearing a seatbelt, which have proven to be in New York wildly successful.
Chief Thompson is very much an advocate of this kind of an approach, and now with the Metro Police Division of the Camden County Force, he's got more boots on the ground, so to speak, than he's had for a long time. And I think, you know, people in Camden who I've spoken to are very much in favor of more boots on the ground. They may have some concerns about how the force came to be. It involved the abolition of the city police department, which had been in place for over 100 years.
But how about the idea, though, that they are going to go after the small things, the broken window syndrome?
If it worked in New York, why can't it work in Camden? I think those quality of life issues are right where people live. I think they have a right, people who live in Camden have a right not to put up with the kind of nonsense that they've had to put up with for a long time in terms of public misbehavior.
And Sean, in Philadelphia, we see Philadelphia wanted to mix these two things together. They're not going to do stop and frisk as they do in New York and Camden. At least that's what they've said on the paper. Philadelphia has been cited, our stop, question, and frisk, as a national example by a judge in New York who banned New York stop and frisk. I wanted to ask you, because you cover Mayor Nutter. Nutter, when he ran in 2007, distinguished from the other candidates and was a stop and frisk fan.
That's right. There's a question as to whether the city was already doing that, but he certainly championed the cause, said that stop and frisk is an answer, and what the judge in New York said is that the way that the city has gone about it, specifically with transparency and oversight, is a model for the rest of the country in terms of making it an open process.
Back to Camden with you, Kevin, though, with the police chief who's been even featured nationally with Brian Williams, etc. This is a good start, but what does Camden, for viewers, still have going for it? I mean, is there anything, all that state stuff that was piled in, the aquarium, the battleship, etc., has there been anything out there that's moved out from that that's positive?
I think the best asset that Camden has is the people who live there, and I think often that gets overlooked. People who live in Camden, for the most part, are hardworking, law-abiding people. There are several thousand folks who are on the wrong side of issues, but Camden has terrific people. It has strong community organizations, and not just civic organizations, but it has groups that are putting housing together and have for decades, groups that are doing things like urban agriculture and culinary education for offenders coming back from incarceration. There's a wealth of talent in the city. What it hasn't had for a very long time, and that may be changing, is leadership. And it also doesn't have, the other thing that Camden doesn't have is a lot of capital.
Right, let's talk about leadership now. I taught in the Camden schools, and I think they're pretty abysmal. I mean, it was violent, chaotic when I taught there, and this is some years ago, and still, now we have I think he's 32 years of age, a guy who's never taught, never been a superintendent.
He has taught.
Okay, but he's an education expert and a can-do type of guy that I think Governor Christie essentially has installed here in Camden, and Christie's made a lot of moves. Christie has not moved away from Camden, I don't think. No. He's been kind of a hands-on with it. What are the thoughts on this new guy?
Well, I think that State Superintendent Ru Hannafard is an interesting man. He's got first of all, the immigrant experience. He came from revolutionary Iran, or post-revolutionary Iran as a young child.
Right.
And he's got experience in Teach for America. He's got experience in education in New York, and he's also had some private sector experience. It's a pretty impressive resume for somebody who's 32 years old. Past superintendents have had perhaps more impressive educational credentials, but I think that this man has a certain quality that seems to be appealing to people in the city. There's been some comment about whether or not someone who's 32, who is not all that deeply experienced in the classroom, can come in and be the superintendent. But let's not forget, he has Chris Christie, or he has the governor of the state of New Jersey behind him. He reports to the commissioner of education, Chris Surf. So I think that gives him a certain insulation from some of the push and pull that has consumed earlier superintendents in Camden.
Now let's switch to Philadelphia too. The latest there, a mess, decision as usual. The schools are going to open. I just talked with the governor's guy today. There's a roiling fight though on, I believe it's $1.3 billion, he told me, Philadelphia got this past year from the state, which seems to be adequate funding. What's the latest? Well, whose agendas and what kind of push-pull are we seeing with politicians over this?
Right now, the question is the $50 million that was promised
Right.
by city leaders, not the state, to the school district so that they can just open the doors on September 9th, just let kids in and have a normal school day. Still about 2,000 layoffs that will be held over from last year. So right now it's Mayor Nutter and City Council President Darrell Clark who are pushing two separate plans to find that $50 million, and it's unclear if they're getting
One
to a
is
compromise.
Nutter putting it onto the budget, adding $50 million to the debt. The other, Clark, wanting to sell up school district properties.
That's right. Clark wants to purchase $50 million worth of empty school buildings and other
Right.
properties or bad tax liens that the school district owns to give them the liquidity and then turn around and sell it when they can. And whereas the mayor thinks that we should just issue a general obligation bond, hopefully pay it off with an extension of the sales tax and
Right.
let the city bear the
Now,
cost.
the Inquirer, not your paper, but the Inquirer had the front page Sunday story about they're going to get tougher finally on deadbeats. What is the problem? The city's owed $500 million plus, I'm told. What's the problem with collecting it?
Pew came out with a study this year that said because the city is so poor and many of these tax deadbeats have bills that go back 20, 30 years, probably only about 30% of what we're owed is collectible. That being said, that's still 30% we're not collecting. So the Nutter administration recently became more engaged in increasing collection efforts and appointed somebody to be the czar of collections, and they're going to try to step that up.
All righty, so we'll continue talking about this. Governor Christie, Cory Booker, who was at a comedy night here in Philadelphia, the Senate race in New Jersey. And what the heck are we watching on TV other than Dom Time in Philadelphia and New York? All straight ahead as we continue on the Dom Giordano Show.